morning or afternoon to those joining us today. We are delighted to be hosting what we think will be a very informative and interactive session on achieving FSMA compliance with BRC Global Standards. This session today is brought to you by Safety Chain Software and GFSR, of course, along with BRC Global Standards. Before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping tips, and then we shall dig in. My name is Jill Bender, VP of Marketing with Safety Chain. Delighted to see so many people joining us today. Just a few housekeeping tips. The recording for today's session will be sent out by email next week. We have quite a few people joining us, but for your privacy, you should only be able to see the panelists. And I would encourage you, if you're trouble hearing the audio today, a lot of times it comes automatically through your computer speakers, there was a call-in number provided, so I would go ahead and call into today's call. I'm absolutely delighted to have John, with the Director of BRC Americas, with us today. Good morning, John.
Good morning.
It should be a very informative session. We're going to be covering quite a few things, and primarily from an agenda standpoint, we'll do a quick overview. John will share with us sort of the key components of FSMA specific to changes and things to be aware of. More importantly, be sharing the enormous strides that BRC Global Standards has gone through in order to help you with FSMA, including going through the new Voluntary FSMA Module. And next steps, what to take if you're interested for those currently certified as well as looking to be BRC certified. And then, of course, we will just share with you a little bit about Safety Chain and GFSR, just a real quick overview of how we help. And what we're hoping for and look forward to are quite a few questions from you, our audience, today. So should we get started, John?
Absolutely. All set to go.
Okay, great. Well, let's go ahead and just start. Let's talk about just, what is FSMA?
Well, FSMA, I mean, this has been a topic for a number of years now, right? When it was initially proposed by the FDA, some new regulation that was going to come in, what it was going to cover, and then as the components start getting put together and put out, it's pretty much all public information now as far as the final rules go. And what they've done, FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act, it's really a upswing that brings the U.S. probably into the leadership role of regulatory expectations around the production of safe food and the protection of food consumers. And they've split FSMA into a number of different, somewhat related, but fairly independent topics. Preventative controls. This is, depending on your perspective, HACCP or your food safety plan. So depending on how you evaluate it, but it's all things food safety, right from your GMPs, to your prerequisite programs, to your HACCP, to your management system around food safety. So preventative controls is now what we do in the way of food safety. Of course, that's split for animal food, human food. Human food, we're in pretty good shape for the most part, especially those that have got a GFSI or some sort of preliminary HACCP system. Animal food, we know there's a bit of work to do because this is a new venture into that area. There are some produce safety rules, and these are fairly prescriptive requirements, things like water safety, training, very basic prerequisite type programs implemented on the farm. So this is farm stuff. Foreign supplier verification started out as what are the rules for imports coming into the U.S.? And based on WTO, the World Trade Organization rules, basically state you can't have tougher rules for imports or different rules for imports than you do have for your domestic production. So essentially, foreign supplier approval program is they have preventative controls, and how you verify that verification needs to be resident in the U.S. So some proof that that supplier outside of the U.S. is following preventative control rules, that has to be managed by the importer of record. Third-party accreditation is a duplication of terms. Basically, BRC, all the GFSI programs are third-party accredited certification. This is something a little bit different. This is a unique topic where foreign entities that require a direct FDA audit, the ability for other firms, other certification bodies, or other government agencies to do those, that's a new program. There's not a lot of movement, and it's not going to impact a lot of people in the very near future. Sanitary transport obviously covers all things transportation. And intentional adulteration, that's food fraud and food defense, kind of wrapped into one, so it's covering those both. So that's an overview of what things FSMA are.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. And again, very comprehensive, but it's very unique to be able to get a sort of high-level, good overview like that. So thank you. That was great. If you wouldn't mind then sort of just sharing the key FSMA provisions. Okay.
Now, so let's talk about, you know, those are the titles. Those are the big topics. What happens now with FSMA is you start to ask the question, okay, how does that impact me? I've got a manufacturing site, or I'm purchasing products, either importing them, I'm the importer of record, or I'm purchasing them from a U.S. domestic supplier. What does this really mean to me? Well, there are a number of things. The FDA has increased inspection authority. They have more rights to access things, the facility records, things like that. They could, as I said, they more in-depth records, and essentially the way that's gone, they've changed the rule to you define as a facility what records support your food safety program, your preventative controls. Those are eligible for FDA access at any time on request. Any records are accessible or available to FDA in the event of an issue. So you have to keep that in mind. They put in the ability for the FDA to pursue a recall on their own without having to do it. It's no longer voluntary. They put some fees in, of course, some detention potentials for where things are not following the rules, and a facility registration program, which is not dissimilar to what we've had in place before. The big two, import controls and preventative controls. Those are the two that really have the impact on facilities. Preventative controls, everybody that has product entering into the U.S., and import controls are basically how do you prove someone not in the U.S. has those preventative controls in place. So really, that's the focus of what I want to talk about. Those are the two items in bold there that really make the difference to facilities here.
Okay, great, John. And I would assume that those two also are the hardest, right, as far as getting up to speed and maintaining, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, the others are all essentially imposed on you. You don't have to do anything. Those are the two that have all the work involved in them for facilities.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what's new then for manufacturers.
So what's really, where does it all reside, I guess is the question. Big change here. This is really what we're doing differently. We're going to preventative controls. Previously, we had HACCP, and HACCP often in the U.S. was defined as management of critical control points. If you don't have CCPs, you don't have HACCP, don't worry about it. Prerequisite programs are just prerequisites. Everything else was a reactive. So we had a recall program in case we got into trouble. We had a hold program in case we had defective product. Preventative controls now move the mindset from, as a manufacturing facility, to we don't just do business as usual, and if things go wrong, we'll take care of them. We will proactively make sure things go right to the best of our knowledge. And that's where there's a change from just managing critical control points to hazard analysis and preventative controls. That's where we're really making a big difference. So that move in mindset, that move in action, the way we manage our facility moves from reactive to preventative controls. So we are now going to put a number of programs in place beyond CCPs, potentially beyond prerequisites, that will control food safety proactively. The other thing, we're always, I mean, you know, general reference 21 CFR 110, that's moved to 21 CFR 117, prescriptive elements in there. That's something we have to be careful of because, you know, if you've had a BRC certificate, if you've had a SQF certificate, if you've had any of the GFSI or, you know, AIB, any other third-party, second-party audit, chances are it is not a prescriptive identical match to what 21 CFR 117 is. So you need to understand what each of those elements are, and those are the prescriptive little things we need to change to get ready for this update. So those are the two classes of things that really have made significant, are going to have our biggest impact on us. Okay, great, thank you. So let's touch on then sort of the primary, and this is where I think it will be very interesting to the audience, preventive controls. What are the areas of concern that you're seeing? I mean, we have to remember this covers all production and storage of food and feed. So back in the beginning when I said sanitary transport, transport is not covered under preventative controls in that under that subheading FSMA, subheading preventative controls. Human feed is covered production along with storage. So anyone who holds product falls under the preventative control rule as well. It's applicable for food and feed. They are two different sets of rules, so potentially, although if you have both in your facility, realistically, you cover the food, you're good for the most part. There's very little additional material to cover off of. It does cover foreign and domestic, no difference. Requirements are the same. The only difference, as I had said, a domestic manufacturing or storage facility will obviously have all their records proof of meeting the requirements on domestic soil, U.S. soil. Whereas a foreign entity, obviously it's not going to, so it's the importer of record who has to maintain the proof in a U.S., on U.S. soil of, yes, these suppliers, either manufacturers or distribution companies, storage facilities, I have proof that they meet preventive controls. The onus is on me as the importer of record. That's a big unique piece we have to understand for those people who are directly importing product. Now, if you're buying it off a broker who's importing it, it's the broker. They're the ones you have to make sure that have covered off on the preventative control verification, and they have that evidence. It covers basic GMPs, current good manufacturing practices, prerequisites, HARP-C, remember, that's our change from HACCP and the Food Safety Management System. So all things food safety fall under preventative controls. U.S. sites, there's essentially no choice. All U.S. sites must have preventative controls. Technically, if you're purchasing from a domestic U.S. source, one would expect them to have their preventative controls in place. At this point, because it's also new and we see the uptake of it is not meeting the timelines, I would expect our supplier to have proof, both foreign and domestic suppliers, that yes, you have a program, you understand what they are, and you intend to meet, and this is how. So U.S. operations, you really have to. Your responsibility again is your verification program, and again, it's all based on the CGMPs in 21 CFR 117. So that's kind of where we have to worry in general terms. We haven't dug too deep yet. Joe?
And again, just as a follow-up on this slide, so when you say areas of concern, it sounds like much more along the lines of what you view as the largest challenges that companies are undertaking with FSMA. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah. It's about the preventive controls. What areas should we look into to make sure we're comfortable that we're good with? Remember, anything to do with storage, anything to do with production of food, doesn't matter if it's on U.S. soil or not, and it covers all things food safety. So it's a pretty broad brush that they've taken with this, and it's something that we have to really, both for our own sites and our supply chain, have confidence that, yeah, we're there. This is essentially 1999 all over again. You remember, those of you who were working at that point, everything, the last 6 months of 99 was all about Y2K conformance and checking your own facilities, checking all of your suppliers, verifying that, yes, they're still going to make it through January 1st. It turns out that wasn't, that wasn't an issue. But this is a little different because there's no physical change, and regulation comes into bear, and we're liable for it.
Right, and the date isn't just like, oh, we've made it through this date. It's more of the ongoing maintenance, right? So not just 2016, it's 2016 and beyond.
Yeah, it's not a single hurdle to get over and then business as usual. It's a step change. You're going to have to step up to the new elevation and maintain yourself at that elevation. So it is. You're right. It's not a project where you can once done and let's get on with the regular business. It's a new way of doing business.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, great. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit then what you view as really new.
Yeah, as we drill down further, Jill, now we're starting to see, okay, and I realize, this from day one, everyone we've dealt with, both foreign and domestic suppliers in the U.S., the question has always been, there's a heck of a lot of material here. You Google FSMA and you get, hundreds of thousands of websites and commentary and discussion boards. The question, rightfully so, people ask is, so what does this mean to me? How is this, I have a job to do. What do I need to accomplish? So what's really new? Food safety has now become a legal issue. There are people who are legally responsible for food safety, and there are two people specifically named in the regulations, or two roles that are specifically named in the regulations. And this has to do, I mean, I wouldn't quibble whether it's site or company-wide, one or the other, probably more likely both if there's an issue. Two people, as I say, the agent in charge. That's the verbiage used in preventative controls. What we mean by that, the person in charge of the facility. Who's responsible for food safety? Typically that's going to be the plant manager, site manager, something like that. Whoever's ultimately makes the decisions, hiring, firing, signing checks. That's the person, the agent in charge. They are legally responsible for food safety. And should it not be done, you know, if due diligence is not taken care of, there are legal ramifications for that person. Very similar to the qualified individual, and it's used in two places, that term. It's a new term, get used to it. There is the qualified individual, and that's used kind of in general throughout preventative controls and 21 CFR, and it's really about if there's a qualification or skill set required for a specific task, that person is the qualified individual. So if my job is to run a pasteurizer in a dairy, I would be the qualified individual to run the pasteurizer. On a much more important note is the PCQI, Preventative Controls Qualified Individual. This is the person who is the expert in food safety who's responsible. So agent in charge, plant manager, they make sure they've got a PCQI, Preventative Controls Qualified Individual. They're responsible for food safety. Now, agent in charge is responsible to make sure the PCQI is competent. Let's face it, there's a layer here that happens. That PCQI part is extremely important. It's something that people really are going to have to focus on. And as the way we've approached it is we've said, well, build a file. Understand what their responsibilities are, and then have a corresponding document that says some proof to say, this is how I've vetted that person as competent. So things a PCQI is responsible for. Well, the food safety plan. So, or for, meeting preventative controls. So, okay, well, they took this training course in preventative controls. We're good. They know that. They're responsible for what's essentially the HACCP plan. HARP-C, HACCP, it doesn't matter a lot what you call it in hindsight. They've got HACCP training. They've got a certificate. 4 years ago they took a 2-day course. They wrote an exam, qualified as that. They've got 10 years experience in the industry. Maybe they've taken, we're an ice cream plant. They've taken an ice cream course or better process school if it's a thermal processing operation. So build the justification behind. Don't just point a finger and say you're a PCQI. Congratulations. It's really about I'm the agent in charge. I've named a person. I have to now justify that person. So here's their file. Here's their CV that justifies the concept of PCQI. So that's a big step. It's not point a finger, put a new label on your business card. It's really about justifying and getting that person. One other big section they're responsible for. This is an important one. They're responsible for all the validation of everything in the facility, food safety wise. I mean, if I was naming someone responsible for validation, I would probably make sure they had a validation training course, or I verified that they had a good skill set in validation, because that's not something that's natural. It's not something that you learn in school for the most part. It's something. It's a skill set you're taught at some point, formally or informally. So really new. As I said earlier, it's about prevention. It's not about let's fix things once they break. It's about prevention, as you had mentioned, Jill. It's not a document. It's not a program. It's not a new binder on the shelf. It's a systematic approach to the organization's operation, period. It's not a one-time project. It's the way we do business from now on. So, if when we had HACCP come through a number of years ago, we had a HACCP binder, stuck it on the shelf, pulled it out whenever an inspector came by. Life was okay for some. That's not going to work this time. There's no new binder saying FSMA and leave it on the shelf for the inspector to come. So new way of thinking. That's kind of where we're going as far as really new.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. And a question came in from the audience. I think it's just an appropriate time to throw this at you and say if you could share some light on it. With PCQI, certainly we've seen a plethora of courses now being provided out there, right? And I know a lot of organizations are sort of rushing to get someone in those courses. The question was more in reference, is that something that has to be maintained, right? The certificate, is it just a one-time or, every 2 years, 4 years? Do you know what the standard is around that?
Well, I'm gonna back up a little bit. I assume the person's talking about the FSPCA-based PCQI course. Sorry for all the letters throwing out there. At this point,
lots of acronyms.
At this point, there is no expiry date on that. I would, they basically have to produce those same courses for animal feed, for all the other requirements that I had mentioned, the produce safety, foreign supplier verification, third-party credit. These courses have to go on for all of these things. So I would say, if you've taken the FSPCA course, don't worry about the expiry on that. That being said, look back at the course. I mean, they're doing a tremendous job getting that course rolled out. There's no exam for it. It's, as far as to be train the trainer, it's essentially an extra half, take the course plus an extra half day. If you're comfortable that that course alone has given you what you need to justify the title of, or the designation of preventive controls qualified individual, I would say you're set on that. If you took it, I would say, okay, how do I feel about validation? What's my comfort level? Can I stand behind, argue, and justify all the validations that we've done within our facility? If so, find the next. If not, maybe that's something we need to focus on. HARP-C, specifically developing a HARP-C program. I mean, 2 days of FSPCA didn't give you a huge depth of HARP-C. Maybe that's something else. The technology that you're, if you're working in a slaughter plant, are you comfortable with the technology? So I would say from that PCQI, if you've got the FSPCA course, fine, keep that certificate, put that in your PCQI file, but really ask the bigger question: what do I need to know to effectively manage this job? And instead of same thing, it's not take a course once, I got the certificate, I'm good for the rest of my life. It's okay, what else should I know? What should I be able to do to effectively manage or control food safety with this organization? So long answer, but hopefully that got it.
No, absolutely. Thank you for that. So let's switch gears a little bit and just start talk about the business type and the compliance timeline. Certainly we have something coming up very quickly, right? In September is the first compliance date. Would you mind sharing this with the audience?
Absolutely. It's September, a few weeks away now. It's coming. It's amazing how fast that deadline came on. Basically, the FDA has defined, based on sales or number of employees, a couple of operational timelines. So, if you've less than $1 million sales per site, and I don't believe you can look at this per organization. It's got to be per site. Less than $1 million sales, you get 3 years to put this in place. That's a pretty small operation if you're selling less than $1 million. Fewer than 500 employees, full-time equivalents, you get 2 years. So this is not September 2016. This will be September 2017. And we're talking just preventative controls, remember, at this point. So that's where I would expect the majority of facilities are going to fall. Everyone else, meaning if you have technically if you have more than 500 full-time employees, it's in a couple of weeks. Congratulations, you're now under a new set of regulations. A couple of interesting points. Those are fairly easy, straightforward. That's all good. 2 interesting points beyond that. There are a whole slew, if you read through the regulations and the build-up to it, there's a whole slew of exemptions possible. My recommendation is don't waste a minute trying to get an exemption, trying to show that, well, I can squeak out of it for this reason. Realistically, I mean, these regulations are good. There's nothing that you can argue in these regulations that a food manufacturer shouldn't be doing. Yeah, some of them are tough. Some of them may, it may not fit every instance every time. But by and large, these are good basic food safety requirements. If you want to argue as a food manufacturer that you're not, food safety is not relevant to you, I found an exemption. I think you're, from a statement to your customers, not great. And should you be involved in a health issue due to your products, I'm not sure your exemption wouldn't. You better hope that exemption sticks and it isn't disproved. So yeah, I would say waste no time whatsoever trying to show that you potentially could be exempt. Get on with it. Produce safe food. The other thing is, okay, so what about my supply chain? Foreign supplier verification. Essentially, your supply chain, you get 6 months. There's a little bit of a leeway. So if you've got foreign suppliers, they must meet preventative controls within 6 months of you having to do it. So if you're on next September, then it's May next year. You have to have evidence that all of your foreign suppliers have met preventative control requirements. You have to have proof sitting there when the FDA shows up. So Two big pieces of work. We got the timeline for ourselves. We got to make sure we know, I mean, it'd be great if you fall into that middle group and you get an extra year. If you don't, and you're in this year's group, make sure you've got things underway. If not, you're not quite there, well, full steam ahead to get that. But don't forget your supply chain. That's the big key. It's great for you to make it and get the big check mark. I got my report. I've had my first FDA inspection, and I'm good. It would be awfully nice if you were confident that your supply chain was going to make it through with you, because if you lose your supply chain, it doesn't matter how good your organization is. So I will leave it at that.
Okay, great. Thank you. So let's dive in then as far as BRC goes. I'm very excited to talk about this, John. I know that BRC has made enormous investments and strides in helping the food industry community rise justification, if you will, in meeting business compliance standards. So please share with us what BRC has been up to.
Well, for those of you who know BRC, you know our version 7 just came out about 18 months ago, and we were actively pursuing the Food Safety Modernization Act in its interim form as we were writing that standard, trying to embed as much as possible, at least in the direction. As I said, preventative controls, there's no argument. They're good things. So if there were any twists we can put into our food version 7 that would support it, we certainly did everything we could at the time to do it. Afterwards, we had version 7, it rolled out. Once the preventative controls got published, we hired the Atchison Group, and they did a fabulous review of the standard compared to it. And what they found was, we got 98% of it right. It's bang on. And if you look at it, those of you who have downloaded the regulations, right? It's a pile of legally written requirements, plus it's all the commentary and discussion to an interpretation around those requirements. So if you're going right to the source and getting the preventative controls, and you need to implement that, that's a tough way to go. What we've realized, what many people have realized is, well, geez, BRC certification, it's 40 pages long, the requirements. It gets me 98% of the way there. I can read these requirements. They're tough. There's no doubt that BRC is not a tough set of requirements, but they're ultimately readable and understandable. And so I can read the BRC. I can understand what needs to be done. I can progress my system by utilizing that mechanism as opposed to the terminology potentially used in FSMA and trying to do a workaround like that. So that's been a big plus. Now, that being said, we're not perfect. It wasn't, I mean, there are a lot of very prescriptive, detailed little things, unique language within the preventative controls that aren't matched. Like I said, 98% right on, 2% we're not quite there. And that was the 2% that, certainly our certified companies around the world wanted to know about. And for us, I mean, our role is not to simply measure and put a label on things. Our role is to support companies in producing safe food and meeting regulations, producing quality food. That's the goal of BRC. It's not just it's not a certification scheme. It's a mechanism to improve food safety. So we commissioned a number of people, and what we did is produced a guidance document. We called it BRC Food 7 Module 15, FSMA Guidance. And what it is those prescriptive little elements that are the differences. So if it's, if BRC says one thing and FSMA says something slight variation on it or is more prescriptive, which is more generally the case, we have a guidance document for that, and it can be added on to the audit as a assessment. So now a site that gets a BRC audit can get Module 15 added on to their audit. Now they have documented proof of 98% plus 2%. That goes off to your supply chain, your customers, if you're worried about that end of it, or it's your own corporate oversight or review practice run going into the preventative control requirements as they become due. We've done a number of other things. I mean, we've created a training course called HARP-C for BRC. When it's time to, if you haven't got a HACCP training program or certificate, you've got a new hire that needs HACCP training, or it's just time to sharpen the saw. It's been 15 years since you took your last HACCP training. We've made that, we developed that course, and that was very well received. It continues to run for people that are interested, and it will continue to run for some time. And then in support of our preventative controls qualified individual, we've got a good internal auditor course. We've got a great validation training course. We are on the brink of making public our category exams, and this is something we put in place for auditors. So, if someone says, well, I'm an auditor and I audit alcoholic beverages. I audit breweries, fermented products. We say, great, that's great that you would like to audit that. That's great that you've got some experience. We put technical exams in place, which is essentially validation or verification, I guess, of the technical competency of the individuals. And that's something that people have been saying, geez, that would be great for my PCQI. If we're a bakery, I would love to have my PCQI write the bakery technology exam as further evidence, or either that they're where they should be, or maybe there's some gaps that we need to fill. So we're on the verge of making those things public. So huge amount of work, as you'd said, Joe. Big investment. That Module 15, big plus for us, and I know people are really have really appreciated that and putting it to good use.
Great. It's interesting, and listening to you sort of talk through this. My assumption is, 2% that was your gap, and just looking at the enormous amount of work and what you're offering and what you're looking to offer to fulfill that gap for the companies out there is tremendous. So good to hear as far as a resource for customers. So let's talk about the module. What did you develop?
Okay, well there it is. There's a copy of it, and you can see the name, right? We were a little cagey on the name. It's a Preparedness Module and Guidance. You have to remember, one requirement for GFSI benchmarking is that every scheme has this line in that says, and you meet all appropriate regulations. So technically, once regulations are in force, we don't need anything else. The standard, the standard covers it. We're not going to write every, we have audits in 118 countries. We're not going to write the standard reflecting 118 countries worth of regulations for everybody to try to meet. It's just not going to happen. So, this was meant to be a bolt-on for some, and some people have said, well, geez, I had my audit back in December. I don't want to wait. Can I just have an auditor come in and do the assessment against that? Absolutely. It's there, companies just want to use it as a pre-assessment. Companies are using it as a guidance document. So, okay, I got my BRC. What else do I need to know before I call an auditor? Let me download that and start implementing things. So it's a nice little document, very well written. We had some great help writing that. A lot of good effort went into it. So that's essentially the standard, what we're looking at. So it's an add-on to a BRC certified organization or someone who's using the BRC program. You've got all those parts. We know it's not quite a perfect fit. Bolt this on, adds a little bit of time during the audit, and you get documented proof from a qualified auditor to say, yes, we beat it, I can show my customer, or we have misses, and what we need to do to fill the gaps. So that's there's a little more in the next slide, I think, as well.
Okay, let's go ahead and go there.
Ta-da! There we go. So what we've had, we rolled this out, as I say, about 6 weeks ago. We did a number of webinars to our already certified facilities. Those webinars are, just to let them know it's available and how it works. And they've been calling their certification body and saying, okay, I need this added on to my audit. I've got an audit coming up. I want this added on. It's either almost like a verification that we know what we're doing, or we need it to be able to give to our customers as added proof. Or, we just had our audit a few weeks ago. Can we, when an auditor's in town, can we get someone in to come back and just go through this section for us? The nice thing is, because, everybody, you get a grade when you get an audit, right? You get nonconformities at times, you get a grade. As a voluntary module, because you're bringing on more requirements, we don't count them against someone's grade. So if they've got their 4 minors in the regular BRC audit and they get 2 minors or 2 findings in Module 15 in this voluntary module, their official grade is a AA with 4 minors. So because this is not, these are future needs for future regulation. As of today, they're not in effect. So a finding is simply a finding against future situations. So that's it takes a lot of weight off. It's a free assessment. It's an additional assessment. The site can decide their response and closure. If you're the very small and you don't need to meet for 3 years, you do the you add this assessment to your audit and say, well, we're gonna wait 2 years to close this. That's fine. There's no mandatory closure of it. You get a report. You get the findings in there. Certainly, if your customers know you don't need to meet it, for another 12, 13 months, and you're deciding to take 3 months to close it properly, it's a no-brainer. That's perfectly acceptable. You get a full report. That goes up on the directory, so when you grant access to a customer to your audit report on our directory, they would also get access to that voluntary module. The evidence we've seen, the companies that have done it so far, it's around 3 hours, 3.5 hours of extra audit time on site, a little bit of time for a report. So it's a great investment to make sure we know what we're doing, and we've got someone who's qualified, someone who's taken the training on this, someone who's, most of the auditors now we've got up to FSPCA training, so they've got a good handle on the expectations through FSMA. So that's essentially the way it works.
Great. Well, why don't you go ahead and take us through an example? I see you've embedded one here. You want to share with us what this is all about?
Yeah, and some are very simple and straightforward. This one's one of the nice simple ones. What it does is you can see the 21 CFR 117.315. So it brings you right back, so you can go back and identify things per the regulation and the guidance we give. And it's this is the classic example of the prescriptive nature of some requirements. And those of you who are trying to read it all out, it's really easy to explain. BRC certification. Thou shalt keep records for shelf life of the product plus 1 year. 21 CFR 117.315, thou shalt keep records for 2 years. Right, slight variation. So that's, some of them are a little more complex, like when we get into the PCQI requirements. This one is nice and simple, so you have to change your record retention. And what we're recommending is, first of all, define what records are going to fall into this. So this is not every record in the facility. This is only those records that support the preventative controls. So we've got a subset of our total record package. Those we have to make sure we keep for at least 2 years. And we're good in 21 CFR 117.315. It's that simple. I've got another example right after this. And this is about recalls. Now, you know yourself, those of you who are BRC certified, BRC has a nice recall requirement set both on the incident management and recalls. When you look at 21 CFR 117.139, there are a few prescriptive elements that aren't necessarily covered in BRC. Part of your recall procedure, there must be a mechanism to ensure that you're notifying the people with your product how to dispose or return it. So a reconciliation must be part of the recall program. Now that's more or less covered in BRC. This is a new one that's not. You have to conduct an effectiveness check to verify a recall is carried out appropriately. That's new. So we've got a recall plan. This is kind of like that last line of your HACCP plan or your HARPC plan that says, oh, and we have to review it once a year. This is a review, and if we ever use our recall plan, we have to measure the effectiveness of it. So we have to do a session where we not just we found 92% of the product. We were able to get logistics set up to return the product within 24 hours. We were unable to contact one customer because we didn't have an up-to-date phone number. This is what corrective action we put in place so that doesn't happen again in the future. So you need to do a real post-op review of any recall that happens to take place. You need to have that written in your recall procedure. Should this get used, we will do a review and maybe some details about how it's reviewed. And then appropriate disposal of recalled product. That's more or less spelled out in the BRC. But again, BRC's got a great recall program. That one specifically about the effectiveness check is not covered. So that's part of that 2% that we missed. Make sure you change it in your site, and then what we'll do is we'll have the auditor go through your recall program and make sure that portion is in there. So fairly straightforward. As I said, I took some of the easier or more concise examples of the explanation. But there's a total of about, I think, 18 of these requirements. Not a lot.
Certainly not a lot when you think about the documentation around FSMA. I think it's, 900 plus pages, right? So that's a much more compact, manageable component. Okay, great. Thanks, John. So let's talk about next steps. What's the action plan for achieving FSMA compliance? Okay,
well, this is a little bit different than, I hate to use the word project management. We've talked about this, Jill, because it's not a one-time project that we're done. But it is certainly a project to get up there. And then we'll put project phase 2 on to maintain ourselves up there. But we don't have it. Usually when you do a project, you say, okay, how long is this going to take? Okay, based on the resources we have and the amount of work required, we estimate we'll be complete at this date. Date's been defined. We have no choice. So we have to, step one, we got to make sure when does this come into effect for us? Once we know that, we got to know what's the difference. So you're going to have to get the FSMA requirements and all the interpretation and start understanding what do you have evidence to support compliance to. Or alternatively, as you know, my preference, being a little bit biased, you could use certification with an addendum to make sure that you've captured those. And just to back up a bit, that's the difference between the Atchison report and that we have for BRC versus preventative controls and the voluntary module. The Atchison report really is more of a positive. This is how BRC meets it. So it's similar to the other GFSI schemes that have done the Atchison report. It's really this is how you meet. What BRC did that's unique is this is where it's different, and this is what you need to do. So you got to figure out what the difference is. You know when it's due. You got to figure out what you need to do to get there. I put the supply chain in there because that is so important, and people tend to be so focused on their own organization, they forget to bring purchasing in the room and say, oh, you know what, by the way, we've got another qualification on our list of supplier approvals. They need to meet preventative controls in the appropriate timelines. So we need evidence from our suppliers that, yes, they know what their timeline is to meet, and they are meeting it, especially our foreign suppliers, because we don't want us to be sitting here, you know, September 2nd and say, oh, by the way, we can't use that ingredient anymore because they don't meet foreign supplier verification. Preventative control qualified individual, again, build that file. That may be a big chunk. I mean, if you're saying, okay, you know, the person we've identified as our PCQI really doesn't have a good background in validation, we're going to need to get them on a course. You may be talking 4 or 5 months to get them up to speed. You may be talking a year to get somebody up to speed. Not a bad thing. But we're going to go back to our agent in charge. They better have a measure and mechanism in place to get their PCQI where they need to be. And the last thing, and this is unique, and this I know people sometimes are going to struggle with it a little bit. You need a strategy for the first visit by the FDA after compliance. Now, those of you who are in facilities and have been struggling with preventative controls, don't forget your inspector is in the same spot. They really don't have any more information, understanding, or depth of knowledge than you do. This is fairly new territory for them as well. You have two choices. When the FDA inspector comes in, you can sit there quietly and let them try to learn on you where you're going to go, or you can provide best practice guidance for the FDA. You lead their inspection. So when they come in, you know, let's take the PCQI example. Rather than wait, you know, here's our agent in charge, here's our preventative control qualified individual. During our senior management review, we reviewed we designed the qualifications for our PCQI. Here are all their certificates. We've noted that it's been 4 years since they've had a HACCP training, so in 3 months they're taking HARPC training as a refresher, and then here's our backup person we're bringing in and how we're building their qualifications. You bring that file. There's nothing, you know, there's nothing bad in there. There's nothing you want to worry about showing an inspector, but it certainly guides them down the pathway that you're thinking. Because the last thing you want is an inspector, best of intention, going down a different pathway simply because it's a different personal interpretation. This is not all cut and dry. There is a fair bit of interpretation. So, you know, build that strategy. How are we going to work with the FDA when they come in to highlight our program, to show them how we've met, so that we haven't invested in one direction, and because this is what they saw at the last facility, they'd like to see that at this facility, we now have to reverse direction and go do something else. So it's an interesting concept. I think it has some merit. I really think it certainly has more merit than sitting back and you know, having to react to potentially different interpretations, which is what we're going to be dealing with for the next few years. So that's, you know, if you got to do things, those are your 5 big steps right now.
Great, thanks, John. You know, and just to touch back on that last part, and I think that's such an important component, and I've heard that a bit of that strategy, so I'm glad you brought that up with Dr. Atchison on our FSMA Fridays. And I think what was interesting is, you know, his idea of guiding that conversation and proactiveness. I'm delighted that you're taking the same approach here in being proactive versus waiting for questions to come in.
Oh, it makes sense. I mean, you know, there's so much interpretation to be done. There's so much learning for everyone to be done around the preventative controls. As I said, step back, they're good things. This is a food industry. We're making food. It's important. Let's do it right. Let's do it safely. That being said, if there are 4 different pathways to get to the same spot and you took one, show it off. Be proud of it. Show how it works. Make sure you're comfortable. You've got evidence it's functional, and then show it off. Don't let somebody say, well, I thought the other pathway was good. Well, guess what? They may be equally good. Let's make sure that we're helping to build this new relationship.
Absolutely, and I think the end goal is being worked towards. So next steps, help us out here, John. If you're BRC certified, what happens here if adding the module, or if you're not? Share some guidance here.
Well, and we've been building this up with our certification bodies. They've certainly gotten all a good preview to this. Our expectation was that they were reaching out to their customers. You've got an audit coming in at the end of August. We do have the voluntary module. You'd like to take a look at it. You'd like to add it to your audit. We can schedule that in. So a number of certification bodies have been pretty proactive in reaching out to their customers or customers at large to build that into their next audit cycle. And vice versa. We've had sites that have learned about this and gone to their certification body and, hey, we need this in there. Or, as I say, based on timing, it just didn't work out, or they're ready for it now and their audit's not due. It can be arranged. Short notice can be a little tough, but certainly, within a reasonable amount of time, if you just want the auditor to come back, your BRC auditor to come back and do that voluntary module, that's great. Now, the voluntary module, we've been asked this a number of times, what if we're not certified to BRC? It's not a lot. It's certainly helpful for those points we're talking about, but the other schemes, BRC Atchison was pretty clear. We were probably the closest scheme, so it's not going to be as comprehensive if you meet other schemes. BRC, FSSC, IFS, SQF, we all do things differently, and what the variance between BRC and the preventive controls and the other schemes there's going to be difference. So it's okay, but it's really best utilized in combination with the BRC audit. Companies that aren't BRC certified, it is a journey. It's not, as I've said in the beginning, BRC is a tough standard. It's the Cadillac of standards. It's not hey, come and give us an audit report to verify what we're already doing. There's some things generally that need to be changed to get up to the level of BRC expectations. There are prerequisite programs you could have, there are pre-assessments available. We've had a number of companies that have said, we're not certified. We've been working on it for a little while, but we need a pre-assessment and the voluntary module attached to it. Yeah, we can do, the certification bodies can do that, no problem. So now you're getting someone to come and do that bigger gap analysis, not just here's the gap with BRC, but here's the gap with BRC and preventative control. So you get that all in one place, and that really now allows you to align your resources or build your resources to meet the timeline you're stuck with. So really the next step, we've got some information. You're learning right now. Coming to this webinar is a fabulous next step. We've got some information that I'm going to talk about next. But it's get in touch with your certification body and see what you can see how soon. And if there's any struggle, if you don't have a good contact with your certification body, by all means get in touch with us with inquiries at brcglobalstandards.com or myself at any time, and we can certainly help you make it through there. So after that, that's the things you have to do. This is the next one. So what have we got to help you? 2 different websites we've put stuff on. So we'd like to make it easy, but this way you get to go to 2 different websites. brcbookshop.com. You can download the food standard or any of the standards. It's free to download. We've never been accused of building an overly simple to use website, so it takes a couple of clicks to get there. But you can download a PDF of the standard for free at any time. Anyone can do that. You can also, associated with that, download the module and checklist. So there's 2 additional pieces, the formal module and a checklist, which is just kind of it's a Word document that allows you to, type your own internal audit report against it. So you get those free anytime you want them. Again, if there's any struggles with that, get in touch. You wouldn't be the only person to ask on occasion with a little help in downloading things. As well, if you want that Atchison report, it's free. It's on our main website, globalstandards.com. Just go on Global Standards. There's a little search bar. Hit FSMA. You'll find pretty much everything you need. it's a pretty good search function there. So you can get that Atchison report if you want to read through it, get a little more depth and understanding and how they connect. And as well, there's a fairly in-depth training webinar on the individual requirements. So we walk through, I think, pretty well all of the requirements within that. Here's what preventative controls require. Here's what BRC says. Here's the gap. Here's our recommended action to close the gap. So nice little thing, webinar that you can download for free. Nice piece of training, and it will certainly help people out.
Great. And what we'll do too is, there's a lot of information on the slides. Typically we just send out the recording, but I think it's worth the effort as well to send a link to these slides so that you'll all be able to access these URLs fairly quickly as well. It looks like there's quite a bit of resources that follow up to this. So thank you, John.
Thank you, Joe.
So with that, what I'm going to go ahead and do in just a little bit of the time we have left here, quite a few questions have come in as we were talking, and some of them that I've thrown at you already, John, a few more that I'm going to bring up. Some are very specific to FSMA, right? So if I put something at you and you're not quite sure, we completely understand because there's lots of very granularity to it. So as those questions come in, I've taken us out of full screen, so go ahead and if anyone else has questions, go ahead and put those in. And it's just a quick review as questions are coming in about safety chain and GFSR and how we can help in your continuous approach in looking about FSMA. So with safety chain, just something for our participants here who may not be familiar with us, we are a comprehensive food safety and quality management solution. It provides ongoing maintenance of your programs, whatever those programs may be, whether it's a certified scheme, such as BRC is part of it, the customer requirements, your HACCP, Part 2, whatever the programs are that you're trying to maintain and manage on a day-to-day basis, our comprehensive system helps you with that, including a central repository of data to make easy audit readiness 24/7 for inspections, inquiries, and so forth, as well as, I think, the more importantly, what John spoke about in that quest of showing continuous improvement, enabling you to do that. Also, I would like to, again, thank you, GFSR, for being our sponsor today as well. For those of you who have not had a chance to visit their site, it really is a great information and trusted online resource for food businesses in our global market and supply chains. And just, again, a complete resource guide from articles, white papers, to different virtual discussions. I know they have one coming up August 24th. They're going to be talking about what they're saying is the next big killer, the food fraud. That should be a really interesting discussion. So I do encourage you, if you haven't already, to join their site, and it is complimentary. And I'm a member and certainly appreciate all the information they have posted up there. So let's go ahead and dive in the few minutes that we have left with the questions that have come in. John, one question that came in is, and I do believe you touched to this, but if you could expand, if you're able to, when do our suppliers need to meet these requirements?
Now that's technically your suppliers have 6 months after you're due. So if you're due, September 2017, 6 months later, which I believe is May 2018, your suppliers. Now, what do you mean by your suppliers have to meet? It's a little clearer on foreign suppliers where you are the importer of record. You have to have evidence that they meet all of the preventative controls and anything else that comes into play in the future, such as food fraud, or intentional adulteration. So technically, suppliers have 6 months after you're due. If it's a domestic supplier, you get in this weird situation of, well, it depends on their size and your size. So what if they're a very small manufacturer, so they get the 3-year timeline, but I'm in the due this September, when do they have to meet preventative controls? Technically, they have to meet preventative controls in 6 months. So they don't get that. Now, it's not clear, and that question has not been clearly answered to the best of my knowledge, but I think what we need to do is push to get it done sooner rather than later. I think, in the grand scheme of things, the one thing we do have to keep in mind, the FDA is not going to go out and audit every facility this September that's due. You may not see an FDA audit for some time afterwards. So if you're not going to make it for September, don't give up. keep working. If you've got, you've got 400 suppliers, certainly break them up into, okay, which suppliers fall under the already instituted large supplier, the greater than 500 full-time employees. Let's make sure, let's do them as the first round, and then we'll start asking the medium-sized suppliers, and then we'll go after the small suppliers, because you can't do it all at once. So break your task down into the most critical time-sensitive pathways. So I think, technically 6 months after you, I wouldn't get, if you have a big supply chain and you're going to have to parse it out, I would go with a secondary, go with the big ones next, middle ones next, small ones next. But technically, I would imagine everyone your entire supply chain should meet afterwards.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. And I think what's interesting to follow up to that, too, we talked about September, right, that there's not going to be just this onslaught of inspectors hitting facilities from the FDA. What's interesting, though, and I've heard this in other discussions, is, which ones are they going to choose? And I think a lot of it is surrounding the ones that are more high risk, right, as far as what's being produced.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. How do they best target? Well, and we've had a lot of discussions with the FDA as well, and other governments. I mean, we've been down to see SAGARPA in Mexico. We certainly see CFIA in Canada. We see in the FSA in the UK and the Dutch folks. What they fully understand, they don't have the resources to target everybody. So they have to make best use of the resources. You're right. A, go after high risk, and B, I mean, all of the GFSI, most of the GFSI programs have a public listing of certified companies, whether it's FSC, SQF, BRC. We all have a public listing. So if the FDA has 10 sites to go at that they want to assess, and 4 of them have a GFSI certification, you know where they're going to spend their time. They are very comfortable. We've done trials with them with BRC audits. They see BRC and the other GFSI schemes as good components building up to verification of compliance. So there'll be some defined targeting. High risk, and high risk, when you look at risk profile, someone who's certified is less risky. We know that than someone who's not. So and FDA is very, very aware of that as well. Okay,
great. John, quite a few more questions came in, and I apologize. I was remiss in asking you earlier. Do you have time to stay on with us for about another 5 or 10 minutes tops to answer a few more questions?
I can certainly do that, absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you. And for those, I will, I know some people have chatted with me saying thank you and that they need to log off. So thank you for those who do need to leave us at the top of the hour. And for those that don't, hang on here. We have quite a few more questions that we will try to address here. So let me go ahead, and there is something in regards to conformance dates, and again, this might trip you up, John. I'm not quite sure, but I'll go ahead and throw it at you. Is the conformance date by facility or company-wide? So if my company has 4 different divisions, do we comply all at the same date or different dates depending on size of each division?
Bingo, you figured it out, yeah. It's basically by facility registration number. So it's not company-wide, it is individual facilities. You are absolutely right. You may have 3 different target dates. You may have 6 different target dates if you have 3 different size organizations, plus you're a supplier to other people who are looking for verification of their supply chain. So good luck keeping track of all those numbers. As I say, go back, figure out what's going to hit you first. Again, you got 3 different size plants that fall into 3 different timelines. Guess who you're going to learn on? The one that's due first, right. You're going to bring the other. There is a wealth of benefit, and I've seen this with people that are moving multiple sites through certification. The first audit, you bring people from the other facilities over. So the first facility that works on their preventative controls and does a kind of a pre-assessment of their preventative controls, bring the other sites over. Let them learn from you as well. Your secondary implementations go so much smoother, and it's really a great way to do things. So, yeah, you're going to have multiple implementation dates.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. Another question I think that's interesting came in, and this is in regards to sort of different responsibilities. Is there a key difference in responsibilities for a manufacturer who purchases an ingredient which resides in a foreign country versus the exact same ingredient which already resides within the U.S. as far as preventive controls are concerned?
As far, so you've got the same, you know, we're dry milk powder. We're buying it from a facility in Wisconsin, or we're buying it from a facility in New Zealand. What's the difference? From a food safety standpoint, zero. They both require to implement preventative controls. The difference is me as the purchaser, the folks from New Zealand. If I am the one doing the importing, I need to have proof in my office that they meet preventative controls. If I'm buying it from a broker who's doing the importing, I better, if I want to keep them as a ingredient and not get surprised and not get a surprise call from the broker, I'm going to get after my broker and say, okay, show, you know, explain to me or prove to me that you've got evidence of the preventative controls for that facility that you're importing from. So, you know, again, don't simply think the responsibility is outside my facility, therefore it's okay. It's only okay if you don't need that ingredient. If you're purchasing it from someone else who's doing the importing, it really is beneficial for you. It's mandatory for you. Well, mandatory. It's extremely important for you to make sure that broker or importer has done the due diligence and they've approved that supplier based on preventative controls and they have evidence on U.S. soil. So there's that one. As far as the difference, so that's from the foreign supplier. The domestic, there's an expectation that I don't need to have proof of domestic suppliers meeting preventative controls. So if I'm buying from somebody in Wisconsin, do I need to have proof that their preventative controls meet? Technically, no, unless I want to make sure they're around as a supplier after they're due. So from a legal standpoint, I don't know is the best advice we can give at this point. From a business standpoint, of course you want to make sure your suppliers are going to survive to regulations. You don't want to, unless you've got multiple suppliers, it doesn't matter which one you buy from. Just take whoever makes it through. So requirements identical, proof different. Who holds the proof different, and go from there. But don't treat them significantly different, other than one at the initial phase when you're getting through our supply chain. I wouldn't treat them any differently. In the long run, they will be a little bit different.
Okay, great. Thank you for that interpretation. Another quick question here, just in reference to Canadian plants, and maybe you could help clarify here. How will this affect Canadian plants who export to the U.S. within Issue 7 have to meet all relevant legislation of the country you're exporting? Will Canadians be required to have FSEP and FSMA, or is FSEP equivalent?
Okay, from a non-U.S. plant, Canadian, Mexican, Uruguayan, whoever you are.
Wherever, yeah.
You cannot get a stamp of approval for FSMA by anyone other than the importer of record. So technically, if you're a Canadian plant, there's nothing you can do that grants you certification to FSMA today at this point. Now, the credit third-party certification, that may go down that road, but let's leave that out for now. That's really not an active item today. Today, if I am a large plant, more than 500 full-time employees, and I'm exporting to the U.S., I'm fine. As of September, the importer of record resident in the U.S. needs to have proof that I meet preventative controls. So, again, let's go back to the how do you manage an audit? How do you manage your customers to a certain extent? What are you going to give them that proves you meet preventative controls? Here's my BRC certificate. That's great. We know FDA recognizes that as a good component, like the other GFSI programs. Recommendation would be, a little further. This is where you're going to hand over that module. Here's the audit report. Here's the module showing that we meet preventative controls. And now they, in the U.S., the importer of record, has something on U.S. soil that proves you meet it. If you simply stand back and say, well, I do meet it, you still, it doesn't matter what you say. The legal liability rests on the importer of record. So they're going to do their due diligence, and they're going to want to have, they need to have documented proof of meeting the preventative controls. So you're going to need to provide something Again, is it, if you're a big plant, are you going to be, are all your U.S. customers going to ask you on September 1st for it? We know timelines are tight, but certainly one would expect that the importer in the U.S. is going to ask you for documented proof on how you meet the preventative controls. If you were to send them just a basic GMP inspection report, I would certainly hope they say, no, that's not good enough. If you show them your CFIA number, I'm not necessarily sure at this point that is going to be sufficient, although there are some really good talks between CFIA and FDA mutual recognition. I'm not quite sure how that's going to stand. I don't have any documented proof on exactly what that covers and whether it covers all the preventative controls or not. So a long story. You're exporting from your country into the U.S. along with the product needs to go proof that you meet the preventative controls.
Great, thanks, John. And I know all members of the audience, because there's quite a bit of folks outside of the U.S., appreciated that broader response there. I'm just going to have one more question here, and what I'll look to do here is quite a few other questions came in. We will document that, and if we're able to get some quick answers, we'll put those out on a blog post and let people know. But again, let's go ahead and wrap up with one more question here. And again, thank you for everyone's participation. And I think this one is sort of just reiterating what you've been discussing today, John. If an offshore vendor is BRC certified, will it meet the FDA's requirement? So again, that 98% almost there, right?
Yep, exactly. So offshore, I'm going to assume offshore means we're not in the U.S. and we're shipping stuff to the U.S. Will BRC certification? Nope, get you 98% of the way there. And is 98% better than nothing? Absolutely. Someone who's well-versed on preventative controls may look at the BRC report and say, okay, that's fine, I need evidence of, show me what your record retention policy is. And it could well be that your current record retention policy is we keep our records for 4 years. That'll be documented in your BRC report. Then that portion is covered. There's, I would never assume that everyone, looks at BRC as that's what we need to do. That's a minimum. So we say at least a year plus shelf, and you want to keep them for 4 years. Everybody's happy or satisfied on that one. So someone who's BRC certified, man, you're very, very close. It's certainly, one of the easier ways one of the more readable ways, understandable ways to get there. I would recommend that at least going through that voluntary module once, or download it, fill it out, so that at least you've got the evidence. You can document it in there on what exactly is missing.
Okay. Great, John. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up today's session. As I expected, very informative and very interactive, so thank you, and delighted that both GFSR and Safety Chain could be a part of this, John. The last slide we have up there, and again, we'll send slides and recordings out, or the links, quite a bit of resources for BRC that are up there, brcbookshop.com, as well as brcglobalstandards.com. Safety Chain also continues to share the dialogue and has a lot of information also coming up. We have a monthly series, FSMA Fridays, with Dr. David Atchison that people are welcome to join, as well as a couple other informative programs, safetychain.com. And certainly, again, GFSR, their information hub, and the articles that they have posted and other resources are also a good resource for you. So again, thank you so much, John. It's been a pleasure hosting this with you, and I'm sure that speaking for myself and those involved, we really appreciate the guidance here.
Fabulous. I appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully this helped give a little bit more guidance for people.
Great. Thank you all. Have a good day.